for joining us today for this exciting conversation. We will be talking about right-sized automation for the modern SMB warehouse. And hosting today, we have Humberto Rodriguez, the CEO and co-founder of Supplysoft. If you'd like to say hello.
Yes, thank you, Victoria, and welcome everyone this afternoon. Really appreciate the time that you're taking. This is an exciting opportunity having John Santagate. We've done some projects in the past, and often I felt that automation is not always within the reach of some of our clients. And John brought some exciting news, and I think this webinar will educate a lot of us and you on that as well. Just a little bit of background on Supplysoft. We've been, for those of you that might be new to our webinar series, we've been an Infios partner, WMS, for over 20 years in software services as a full turnkey solution provider, often working with automation as well in the facilities. So we're really glad to have you. I'm going to hand it over to John, introduce himself, and then we'll get started.
Thank you, Humberto, and thank you, Victoria. Yeah, everybody. So as Humberto mentioned, my name is John Santagate. I'm the founder and principal consultant at EMP Advisors. So I spent almost 15 years in warehouse automation, working across organizations and operations of all sizes, identifying how do we apply modern tooling to improve operations and productivity. And it was interesting. I think Humberto, was probably about 8 months ago. You had reached out shortly after I founded my advisory firm, and you had the question, right? You said, hey, I see a lot about this, but just as you mentioned, I have questions. Is this technology really available to the SMB market space? And I answered him with an emphatic absolutely. It's just a question of which is the right type of automation solutions for the SMB market, right? What's right for a $10 billion enterprise isn't the same thing that's right for a $200 million or you name the range, doesn't really matter, warehouse fulfillment operation. But there are solutions that can 100% create value in the warehouse, smooth operations, make things faster, more efficient, and more accurate. And those are some of the things we want to talk about here today. A little bit real briefly on EMP Advisors. We are a vendor agnostic consultancy. I've taken the 15 plus years of experience working in warehousing and automation, and recently decided there was an opportunity in the market to help the buy side of the equation understand, what is real in the market. There's a lot of noise in the market. Some of you may have recently been to Modex, for example, and probably came away with, oh my gosh, there's so many things that look, smell, and sound the same. What's real and what isn't? And so identifying that same gap, I made the decision to step away from the role that I had been in. And in fact, Humberto mentioned I had previously ran the robotics business unit at Infios, and decided to take what I've learned over those 15 plus years in this space and help companies identify opportunities, make decisions that are in their best interest, not the best interest of the vendors, to take advantage of this wonderful opportunity in the market that we have today, where automation solutions look different, they're more affordable, they're more accessible, and so it's no longer a question of should I be using automation? It's a question of what is the right automation that can help my business in the most effective way. And so I built this business to really zero in on that particular component of the market and partner with companies like Supplysoft to help their customers achieve the same. So with that, we're going to talk a little bit here over the next 35 to 40 minutes on how these technologies are being used, some of the pitfalls to avoid, and some of the best practices to engage in.
And just a couple of housekeeping notes. This session is recorded, so just feel free to sit back and tune in. We will send you that recording so you can go back and take a look at anything you might have missed in any note taking. Also, if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them throughout the presentation. If we have a second and it's relevant to what we're talking about, we want to get on that in the moment. If we don't have time, then we'll wait for the Q&A at the end, and then we'll go through some of those questions. So for the attendees, you have that little chat at the top. Feel free to drop a question, and I'll be moderating those questions throughout the presentation. So I'll hand that back to you, John. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Victoria. All righty. Getting on with it, right? So from an agenda perspective, right, we want to look at what are some of the bottlenecks and how do you start to identify them within an operation, specifically an SMB operation, right? We're going to look at where automation can deliver gains through productivity, efficiency, accuracy and things of that nature. Importantly, we're going to look at the role of the WMS and what that plays and how that plays into, determining the best approach to deploying automation in the building, and the data access that exists for you today and how that ties into automation-driven decisions. We'll look at some opportunities, and how they apply from the end to end of the warehouse. It's not just picking, which is often where we start in this space. Like, we've got so many pickers, we need to get more efficient with that process. But picking is one application where automation is valuable. There are opportunities across receiving, staging, put away, sorting, outbound returns, etc. There's even, as simple as water spider or point-to-point movement opportunities where their solutions are going to be deployed within hours and be providing immediate value that oftentimes are overlooked when we're looking at these things, because we've got a tendency to look for the biggest project possible as opposed to the quick wins. And that's why I try to differentiate my approach in helping customers identify the quick wins that then prove the value of these sort of solutions. And then we're also going to take a look at a handful of case studies of SMB customers, edge customers that had made the decision to deploy automation and some of the benefits that they have gained through those deployments. And you see at the bottom there a black bar that says just because you can automate something doesn't mean that you should. I don't know if any of you are in the audience have been on presentations that I've given before, but that's something I really like to adhere to, and I speak frequently. You can automate so many different processes, but if it isn't creating economic value for you as a business, or if it isn't creating value for your customer, maybe you should look for ways in which to allocate your budget for automation in different ways. And especially in the SMB space, right? It's not knowing how to automate or deciding how to automate the processes. It really starts with identifying where and what you should automate, right? Again, just because you can automate something doesn't mean that you should. Once we identified the greatest opportunity relative to creating value for the business or for the clients, that's when we can start to look at, okay, how should we automate those processes? Because, if there's one way to do it, there's typically often, multiple ways to automate a process. And so the interesting thing, I had been, prior to my 6 years with Infios, had been an industry analyst with a company called IDC for about 5 years, where I was, studying the market for automation in the warehouse going back to 2015. And one of the reasons it became really exciting for me when I decided to pivot from being an industry analyst and a consultant directly to Infios was the knowledge that automation wasn't just for the big boys anymore. It wasn't well known, right? At that point in time, and one of the reasons, quite frankly, why the decision to join HighJump at the time, which is now Infios, was they had a bespoke product, the Edge product, that was targeting and working specifically for the SMB space. And to me, it's a much broader market opportunity for automation. There's so many more customers or operations that are in that SMB category that don't understand or might not know that automation is available to them, when the reality is the economic models, robot as a service is an example, or the cost of the solutions, or even the depth and breadth of solutions that exist today are affordable and are creating value for companies of all sizes. So, as that top line says, it's never been more within reach for growing operations, right? The thing about today's automation that's very different than what it used to be is that the historical perspective of automation was you're building the church for Easter Sunday, and the cost of doing that is massive. And you're building a monument in your building that is fixed, that is rigid, that produces a certain amount of throughput, and you're going to underutilize that asset for 10 years. When you finally reach the ability to utilize that asset to its fullest capacity, it's now time to move out of the building. And really, that's an enterprise mentality where you have the big budgets to do that. The really interesting thing about the modern ecosystem is that there's solutions that can be deployed and scaled easily. And some of the more enterprise-ready solutions can do that. But the important thing here to know is that robot as a service, as an example, can deploy a fleet of robots in an operation that will create the value. And then, if you've got a peak season, for example, you don't need to build your church for Easter Sunday. You can build your operation for your average weekly volume demands, and then add, capacity on demand when it's required, and then take it back out, send it back. And so you're not spending budget on assets that are going to sit underutilized for a period of time. You can scale not just over time, but also on demand to really execute in a way that makes the most sense for your business. And the important thing here is not just that it's accessible, but that, there's a higher impact for the SMB market. The wrong decision can often have a much greater impact to the SMB than it may in enterprise, right? A $10 million miss for a company that's, with a B in front of its revenues is a lot different than one that's, sitting in, $100 million a year or less, right? It's 10% of your annual revenues versus a drop in the bucket. And so it gets really, really important to, and that's not meant to be fear mongering or frighten anybody from making these decisions. It's meant to emphasize the fact that there's, organizations out there that are designed to help you make the best decision for your operation, to help you identify where things fit, so that when you do decide to go, you've got a very high probability of a successful deployment with folks that are in your corner, that are working on your behalf to drive success. And then we're going to talk a little bit about that process here shortly. Now, when we're thinking about the right size for, organizations of any size, whether it's the S&P, the mid-size enterprise, the large-scale enterprise, right? There's value propositions that exist for organizations of all size, right? The biggest one that most organizations lean towards is labor relief or labor arbitrage. One thing we've noticed we've done over 60 deployments across 8 countries in the world is oftentimes, while we target labor as the ROI driver, we want to reduce our picking labor as an example. Well, now you're optimizing one function, but then you're going to have upstream and downstream impacts. And so you're going to need to look at the systematic impact of deploying automation. Does it give you the opportunity, for example, to leverage existing resources to fill existing gaps in the business, right? We all know that labor availability, especially in the US market, has been challenging for several years, especially in our space, right? High turnover, low availability of resources, which results in higher cost of associates in order to compensate folks in a way that keeps them in the building. But time and time again, we hear that not just the cost of labor, but the availability of labor are driving forces in making automation decisions. And what we've seen time and time again is clients that leverage these solutions are able to redeploy their resourcing into other workflows where they have existing gaps, therefore right-sizing their operation by targeting the low-hanging fruit of one particular process, such as picking, and then identifying, now we can pick with, 60% fewer personnel. Let's move those folks into other places in the business where we've got acute pains that helps us solve 2 problems at once. And then throughput, right? The idea here, and this goes back again to the IDC days, is how do we do more with less, right? Meaning, how do we get greater throughput with the same or fewer resources that we have? And what automation solutions are designed to do oftentimes is just that. Target non-value added functions of a person's job, automate those processes, and thus allow you to do more with less. You're able to, for example, get more volume with fewer human resources in the building, but oftentimes get more throughput out of a building because you're able to be more efficient. And that becomes a really important aspect of these decisions is, do you need to move out and get into a new building, or can you extend the life of an existing building for another 5 or 10 years? And that's a very, very real concept to think about when looking at automation, is not just labor related savings, but is there an impact on the broader network? And can you create, greater continuity of your operation by staying in a building a little bit longer that that you love, that is doing what you need it to do, but you've just reached the capacity of the building in the way you do things today. If you can do things differently and get more volume out of a building, there's a real economic value to not having to go source a new building. And I talked about accuracy. That's actually one of my favorite ones, right? I often hear customers talk about, right? We've got a high cost of returns. There's customer satisfaction metrics that we need to meet. We've got certain SLAs that we need to meet to be efficient for our clients, and those oftentimes can relate to accuracy. And I'm going to give you an example. We've done a project while I was with Infios with a client that had a 7-figure a year accuracy issue. They were in the apparel industry, and this is more of an enterprise example, but it carries through to companies of any size. In the apparel industry, they might be storing, extra small, small, medium, large, extra large, double X, whatever t-shirts of the same color and style in the same location. And so when an operator went to pick 5 larges, they take a handful of 7, they take the 2 that they don't need, it ends up in the wrong box. So the next person that's picking that, going there for 2 mediums, they actually take 2 extra larges. Now those extra larges make it to the customer. There's ways to remediate that with quality checks in the process. But when you eliminate the need for the quality check, now you would essentially, give the ability to get more productivity through your building, because you're reducing the overall process. As one example, we deployed a goods to person system that eliminated that problem, essentially on day one, by only presenting to them the exact product they needed at the exact time, as one example. And then again, we talked a little bit about scalability, getting more out of your building. These solutions often give you the ability to get greater throughput, and you will have oftentimes a relationship between labor and automation. It's just as you add automation, you might need to add people to the process for sure, but the number of people you need to add becomes fewer, and you're still able to get more volume through the building because maybe you've got less congestion in the aisles, as one example. So the idea here with right sizing automation for your business is looking at where you really need to or can apply these solutions to create value for the business. And again, I talk about AMRs quite a lot. And again, any of you that have seen me speak over the years, that's been a focal point. But when we can talk about, automated put walls, print and apply automation, dimensioning automation, scan tunnels, even RFID solutions for inbound and outbound validation and checks, there's an abundance of automation solutions that isn't just robots, that still applies to the overall process, that are not going to break the bank when you're looking to create operational efficiencies through automation. And so, as we take a step back from the value, right, it is important to think through some of the, the challenges that have been exposed over past deployments with customers that, might have gone at it in a direction and had the opportunity to learn about some pitfalls, right? One of those is, going for a technology or solution without really understanding the problem, right? And that happens all too often, right? For years, the question was, how do we automate? How do we automate? How being the key statement there, not what, not why, how. And those are 3 very different approaches to deploying automation. You should never automate something because you want to automate it. You need to think through, why should that process be automated? Am I looking at automation in the right location? And then once you identify the right how and the right why, now you can look at the many different ways of the why and the where. Now you can look at the many different hows that can solve that problem. But by doing it that way, you have a fundamental and foundational understanding of the problem you're trying to solve. You're not talking about, how do I automate? You're talking about, why do I automate? What's the value? Is it impactful? How is it impactful for the business? How is it impactful for the customer? Now I've got an understanding of why I'm doing it. What are the solutions that allow me to accomplish those goals, right? It's like going to draw a parallel to the current conversation around artificial intelligence, right? People say, how do I AI, right? Well, why? What? Not how do I AI? The question is, why should I? Where should I? And then it's how should I? And the same thing applies to automation, right? Don't let a product catalog drive your decision. Allow your meaning to drive your decision. And then the other piece here, we've seen WMS is foundational, right? You don't want to bolt automation onto a foundation that isn't equipped to handle it, right? Picking automation, for example, into a paper-driven process doesn't add as much value as digitizing the process and then applying the automation, right? If you automate a broken process, you just get it wrong faster, is a great way to look at things.
And John, a quick question while we're talking about this. Is there a red flag or any sign to you that is apparent that a warehouse might not be ready to automate something yet, or to start talking about automation?
Yeah, I think the big one is, hey, we want to automate this X, Y, and Z without understanding the operation itself. What are you really trying to automate? Like, going from this is what we want to automate, you've got to be able to explain to anybody, why do you want to automate that, and what is the value proposition before you say, how do we do it, or this is what we want to do. there are things you look for, right? They're depending on the automation solutions. When we're talking autonomous mobile robots, for example, floor conditions, aisle widths, overall process, data availability, right? I've walked away from project opportunities in the past because clients are like, yeah, I can't give you any of the data. I don't have it. Then it's like, well, we've got to solve that problem first, because if we can't build an automation solution on a foundation of reliable insight, and we're gonna design a solution that ultimately breaks and doesn't meet expectations.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so yeah, this is a little somewhat redundant, but four key areas that we can start with when looking to undergo an automation project, right? One is, as I said, I can't repeat this enough. Start with the problem and the data, right? Allow the operation to drive the decision, not emotion, right? Automating with emotion is a recipe for disaster. We want to automate with purpose and look for the value proposition that exists to solving a particular pain point in the business. And as I indicated, right, it's not always readily apparent. You can look at your business and very cleanly stand there and identify certain processes that could benefit from, automating certain flows. But again, the question is that the right one to be operating? Because there might be a process or an opportunity that isn't as visible, but may be more impactful for the business, right? And so it's important to take a holistic view, because an automation system shouldn't be, bolted in as a standalone. You really want to look at your end-to-end operation as ultimately a system of systems and figure out where the opportunity for the greatest impact exists. And once you solve that problem, then you start to expand out to other areas as an operation. You want to quantify and right size the opportunity, and oftentimes look at the sequence. And I will say somewhat self-serving in that that's the foundation of how EMP Advisor solves these for our clients is, we look at your operation from receiving, staging, put away, pick, pack, ship, sort, outbound, and returns, and then model and then look at all of the different opportunities. And then we stack rank them against strategy and complexity to identify where we really should start as a business if we want to get the biggest bang for our buck. That allows us to understand and create a roadmap very quickly of, here are the automation opportunities that exist for the business across the end-to-end process, across the system of systems. These are the ones that make the most sense, that we call them their quick wins. They're typically higher on, lower on complexity, might be lower on strategy, but still valuable. The ones that are higher on strategy and higher on complexity, they tend to be your strategic decisions. Then you look down to your tactical opportunities, which are high on strategy, but high on complexity. And then the ones that are low on strategy and low on complexity, you can automate the stuff, but that's where, why would you? Because it's not going to add value for your business as it is today. And oftentimes what we preach is, as you go through that roadmap, it's not a one and done. You start to deploy the solutions, and you've got periodic checkpoints. You reevaluate your operation, because once you put some of these solutions in, inevitably some other process is going to have some changes to it. And so it may create new opportunities that could be more meaningful for the business. You got to make sure you got the foundation right. And I know Humberto is going to talk a little bit about that later. But it's the data layer, the WMS processes. How are you storing your inventory? Where are you flowing your inventory? Do you have a slotting strategy in place, right? What is your receiving and put away processes? Can they support, automated directed put away, for example, right? And so that data foundation often can be a prerequisite to determining where the best place to start an automation project is for your business. And then again, somewhat self-serving, but an independent baseline first allows you to understand the opportunities without the vendor noise, right? As I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of noise in the market. There are dozens upon dozens of automation providers all vying for your business, many of whom solve the same problem in a different way. And I will tell you, speaking to any one of those vendors, they will tell you why their product is the best and everybody else stinks. The idea is to be able to sort of triangulate that with a vendor neutral view, someone that's not, invested in the vendor's success, but is invested in your success to help sift through that noise. I'm going to pause and pass it to Humberto, who's going to talk a little bit about, what the WMS that is in play today, especially those of you already using the Edge solution, and how some of this data exists for you, and you may or may not know it.
Right. Thank you, John, for all of that. And actually, I want to reemphasize what John is saying. And I know for a lot of our existing customers, You hear us saying this often from start to finish, and it's almost never a finished activity. Is about the data, about the accuracy, about those foundational components of ensuring that you're capturing the information that's needed. And I'll go through a couple of examples that we highlight here for that, because without the data and having the information that is fundamental, John and his team or anyone wouldn't be able to do real analysis to determine where are some of the bottlenecks, where are some of the challenges. Doing it paper-based wouldn't allow for that. And even for some of our existing customers where there's the WMS is implemented, there are still some processes that you might be doing it paper-based, because it's one of those things that you're going to get to at some point. So I think there's opportunities there as well to reevaluate that. So we'll go through a couple of these examples that I laid out. So for labor and time, um, today, we're capturing from the point that a purchase order is received to the point that data purchase order has been put away, to the point that a replenishment or material handling is being done, for example, to the point of picking. So that information is all being captured. And with an application like Pulse, you have visibility, and we can provide visibility to the performance metrics of all of those activities. So things like the receivers, how long it's taking for a container to get unloaded, for example, how long is it taking for information, a pallet to get put away, to get replenished. So that information is being captured. Same thing on the picking side. And where does that become important for automation is to be able to see, and we can see some of this today through using a tool like Pulse, but be able to see where there's bottlenecks, and where there's certain traffic and congestion occurring that could be helped by automation. And John will talk to some of those as some examples in the case studies that he'll go through. For throughput and volume, another important one, uh, the order volume that you have, and we've seen some of our clients growing from handling 3,000 to 5,000 orders to 10,000 orders a day. And often the idea is that, well, we could just throw more bodies at it, have more pickers, and those are opportunities where we see that you get to a capacity, no matter how efficient we are from a human perspective, we're missing things like travel time. So a picker, for example, that finishes doing pick and has a cart that he's got to travel all the way, and sometimes it could be maybe a half of a warehouse over to a packing area and drop off that pallet or that cart to then get another cart and essentially travel all the way back and start the picking operation, will become inefficient when you have really large order volumes. And so having that kind of information available and seeing those increases is an opportunity that we have today. We can start to see some of that data for helping. Accuracy and quality is another important thing. With the foundations of what we have within the WMS. So things like being able to scan UPC codes, scanning an order, we'll know how much time it's taken for a person to take an order, pick it out of a pick location, and then go over, scan a staging location. So that travel time from pick to drop off is information that we have available today, and we can work towards that. And that's a foundational component, because that will be something that automation can look at. And so a quick example, and Johnson will get into some more deeper, but an automated pallet jack, for example, that once that picker is done, or a cart, that cart goes off to the packing station and another cart arrives at that picker, so that picker can continue picking. So essentially that picker is picking all of the time, because there's no wasted time in travel, dropping off, picking up a cart, setting up another cart, and bringing it back to start the picking process. Another example in accuracy, as well as you look at things like unit of measure and being able to have different pack sizes and being able to validate across those different pack sizes within the system. If you're keeping everything in eaches, for example, we won't have as good visibility into when a customer's asking for an inner to be picked or a case pack to be picked. So by creating the unit of measure pack sizes, which we can do within the WMS, you start to fill that foundational component, so then automation can help further with that. And the last category here is on location and travel. So I talked about that a little bit, but I'll give an example where we've had clients, especially in food and food services, where your facility may not be laid out and optimize for picking. So if you think of it in an environment where you're picking cases of water, for example, and you've got eggs, we obviously are not going to put the eggs on the bottom of the pallet. So making sure that we're sequencing ourselves through the facility, we can help to identify that and organize and optimize the facility in such a way that the heaviest items, again, put onto the pallet first. So getting those things ready allows for automated technologies that John has been talking about, and there are many different ways of that technology to be done. But having those foundational components in the WMS, it's a good base for starting from. And with Infield's Edge WMS, we're collecting a lot of that today. So,
and Bert, just a quick question while we're here. Out of these 4 pillars, is there a particular starting point you would want to look at if you were looking at someone's software today and how it was functioning in conjunction with their physical processes?
Sure. Interestingly enough, this week I'm traveling, visiting a number of clients in the South Florida area, and probably in each of the ones that we've come across, units of measure and pack sizes is one of the ones that tends to trip up people quite a bit, especially when you have new people that come into the operations, because an experienced person will know what the unit is, the inner of the case, but an inexperienced person that the system tells them just grab 12 eaches, does that mean 12 each individual units or 12 cases? So that differentiator is an important one. And that's a fundamental one that applies across all of the operations in the facility. So whether you're receiving, putting away, replenishing. So I would say in our experience, certainly the pack size and the management of different units of measure is certainly an important one to get started with. The other one also is having barcodes, and there I think there's a little bit of leeway, but certainly making sure that you have all of your barcodes and your items barcoded properly so that pickers and receivers can be more efficient in their operation. So an example would be that if your cases outside aren't barcoded and somebody has to validate an item and they have to open up a box to get to the UPC, that's going to be wasted time every time they have to do that. So those 2 areas are important aspects of getting the foundational data ready.
Awesome. Thank you, Bert.
Okay. John, I'll hand it back to you.
I think we lost audio. Unless are you?
Oh, there we go. We're back. You identified a couple of really interesting points there, Bert. Right. One, as I look at the accuracy and quality component of things, right? Inventory cycle counts oftentimes, can be labor intensive, and when you're missing something and it's not where it's supposed to be, it can be quite painful and costly to send a team out to go look for it, especially in certain industries, right? Like I had visited a facility for a company that focuses on motors, right? And a motor might be a 6-figure unit in one pallet location. And so they actually made an investment into an autonomous mobile robot that does cycle counting for them, drives up and down every aisle, creates a snapshot and a digital twin of the warehouse, and identifies when they're at a location that's empty but is supposed to have something in it. But more impactfully for this customer, and they identified getting an ROI within the first month or so. It's robot as a service, by the way, so it's easier to do that. Anytime they had a missing unit, it would cost them hours upon hours to go out there and find that missing unit. And now with this new autonomous cycle counting solution, they're able to identify exactly where everything is in their warehouse. And if something isn't where it's supposed to be, when they do their scan, they can signal the system to either reallocate the inventory to the location that it's in, or create a work order to move it back to the location that it should be, assuming, let's say it's a SKU, but it's in a C location. You want to put it back to your A locations, as an example. So I just wanted to call that out because there are solutions that target those circumstances quite interestingly as a function. And you also introduced the idea of case picking, and that's been a hard one to leverage mobile robots for many years. And that's actually, again, one that's more recently been solved with a swarming system that does, robot meet person at pick location. And so to your point, in a human-driven operation, you want to optimize for the flow, right? But if you decouple the human from the work and you do zone-based picking, you don't care if that robot and that pallet has to come back to the aisle for the best pallet build. You can send it off, do a pick, send it to its next location. So you're optimizing the pallet build, not the flow. So there's a lot of different ways to look at these things as you start to look to how you can resolve operational challenges through automation.
Yep, good call out.
Yeah, I just thought it made sense to talk through there. I think now we're going to talk a little bit about, let's see, why is this not going? There we go. I've got 3 case studies here we want to look at. And again, to go back to set the foundation, I had an opportunity to talk to Bert, as I mentioned, when he first reached out to me as I embarked on my own venture here nearly a year ago. And he said, again, is this automation thing right for the SMB? And I said, Bert, you might remember this statistic. I said, 38% of the clients that I sold robots to over the course of the last 6 years were edge clients.
Got clients, right.
So there is a big market opportunity. Now, it's not the same scale, right? It's not hey, we need $12 million worth of conveyance and yada, yada. These are solutions that created ROI quickly for customers that were in the SMB category and were looking to create operational efficiencies. And realistically, each of these case studies is actually available on the MFIO site as well. So you can dig a little bit deeper there. Fleet Feet was a great one, right? And this is really, really interesting. And I'll tell you, if you ever have the chance to sit in on a session by Anthony Pendola, the head of operations there, he does a great talk about this project. And I'll tell you, he was nuts. They made the decision to implement NetSuite ERP, Infios Edge, and Locust Robotics at the same time. They didn't wait. They said, we're going to do it all, big bang. And he'll tell you, he's like, yeah, man, it was the most stressful 3 months of my life, but now I don't have to do them in sequence. It was done. It worked flawlessly. On day 1, once they had their go live, all 3 systems were operational and they were picking with robots. As you can see, they had a massive increase in UPH. But overall, it was about operational effectiveness. This customer, at a point in time, were only able to pick, they were doing mostly store replenishment of footwear. And so they were only able to really do 1 store per week or so. And now they're hundreds of stores. They're doing multiple stores per day because they decoupled the work. They created digital-based optimization through the WMS. And then on top of that, deployed the robots in a way that allowed them to design their WMS flows to support the AMR business operation. And now they're astronomically more efficient. As I said, they're able to do the same amount of work with 50% fewer associates, but they've also been able to grow their business. I spoke with Anthony not too long ago, and he's like, yeah, man, we've added hundreds of stores, but we haven't changed our operational footprint, right? So they gain tremendous operational efficiencies by combining the power of the WMS and deploying the robots into the operation. But it started with the foundation. They knew ERP and WMS had to come first. It was just a conversation we had was, if you're doing it all, let's see what the force multiplier is by adding robots. And it modeled, it simulated, and they deployed 22 robots and haven't looked back. Another great case study here is Dental City. I'll tell a funny story about how this one happened, especially for those of you that are longtime Infios customers. You would have been perhaps to the Elevate events and had been at the end of the event one day. And I had given a session on the value of autonomous mobility to a group at a breakout session. And one of the folks in the room came up and said, I want you to talk to our CEO. Well, the day gets away from me. It happened to be at the very end of the day, like lights are coming on at the pub at the hotel. And we're sitting there sketching out the solution on a napkin. He first said, I don't think it'll work. And once we started peeling back the layers of what they were trying to do, we sort of designed the solution on a napkin, and literally you took that napkin back, and within 3 months we were signing the papers to get more robots into their operation. They are a regional distributor of dental supplies, smaller warehouse, and that was one of the issues. They had a kind of a segmented warehouse, about 40,000 square feet, but they were growing. Right, they were growing substantially, and you can see through the use of robots, we're able to increase the velocity by 300%. But more importantly, and this is one that my good friend Denny had mentioned, he's like, not only could we double the capacity in our space, we could bring in new associates and be at full productivity on day 1, right? And that's unheard of oftentimes in the warehouse. It oftentimes takes weeks to train somebody to understand, the button flow and on the RF devices and understand the systems, let alone understand the warehouse layout and where certain products are stored. By applying the robots, they took those complexities out and it basically says, go to the location, the robot will tell you exactly what to do, right? I'm simplifying it. There's a little bit more complexity to it, but it's very little more. But again, another great Infios Edge customer that deployed do we say how many robots? I want to say they've got about 30 Locust robots in their facility. They also have a VLM in place. They've got some, some end of aisle conveyors for their outbound sortation. But the big impact was the deployment of the mobile robots that transformed the way in which they were picking to allow them to exponentially expand their picking capacity. And this customer, Peckham. This is one that's near and dear to my heart. Peckham is a nonprofit 3PL, and they hire primarily disabled people, disabled military veterans in their workforce. And so the first thing that was said to me by the champion was, I don't care about, ROI by head count, right? That's not my goal. My goal is to make the job of my associates easier. A lot of them are disabled, and we want to make it easier for them to do their day-to-day work, to go home and, be in, less of an uncomfortable situation. And so we spent a while designing a solution that made sense for their operation. But I had the opportunity to visit them recently, and I'll talk about that here coming up. They're segmented, right? They've got different parts of their business. In their e-com part, they're using the Locust robots. Again, they also have a vertical lift machine. They're, again, an edge customer that's been able to deploy automation to improve their operation, but also improve the lives of their associates, which I think is the most impactful piece, especially for this particular customer. And so what we find is this pattern, right? The pattern is we identify the foundation and make sure we've got the underlying foundation right. And then we can start to look at right sizing in autonomous operation and identifying a solution that makes sense for the business, one that makes sense for the business, not just that makes sense for the people selling you the solution, right? And, oftentimes deploying autonomous solutions, yes, it's about, capital savings, but it's also about growth. And right, I personally believe there's a higher value on being able to grow your operation with the same or fewer resourcing than there is on just creating an ROI on day one, right? If you're taking a multi-year look at where your business is going, and you can see that the application of a solution is going to allow you to achieve your year 5 productivity objectives without investing another dollar in operational resourcing, that's incredibly powerful, right? Again, it allows you to do more with less. And as that bottom line says, the question isn't whether automation works, it's whether you found the version of this pattern before you start to spend money and make investments in the space so that you get it right on the first go round. And so I'm going to go back again in talking with Bert, have an opportunity to share something that I started doing for my clients. I call it the automation opportunity audit. And I'll go back to Peckham because we recently did that for them. And I'll share with you a bit of a readout about a similar client here in a moment. But what this opportunity audit is sort of the next step in this formula is engaging on a dock-to-dock walk, identifying every material movement circumstance in the building, and identifying which opportunities for automation make sense for a business end to end, right? What we end up doing is creating, as I mentioned earlier, a prioritized stack of opportunities balanced against your operational strategy and the complexity to deliver value. We create directional ROI framing. This is meant to be just under the surface. It surfaces a lot of opportunities. And then the question is, which are the right ones to engage in? As a consultant, I stack rank them based on perception, but that doesn't always mean I've got every bit of information. We may say, no, we want to start with a strategic imperative versus the quick wins. I had a customer do that recently, and now we're looking at deploying a 3D sort system for that customer, and going after the high value strategy opportunities first versus the quick win opportunities. But we map these automation opportunities against your operational processes. We sequence them. We provide a feasibility range. And this is all done essentially within a 7-day period. We walk the facility, and within 7 days, there is in your hands an automation audit report that stack ranks every opportunity that we identified for automation across a building. And this is just meant to be directional, show you one page of what is typically a 13 to 15 page deliverable, but this is the most impactful. It's a delivery matrix. As I mentioned, we want to look at where the opportunities reside against the strategic fit for the business and the implementation integration complexity. as you'll see here, the quick win number one here was collaborative follow me carts. These are robots that require zero Wi-Fi, zero connectivity, zero infrastructure, zero mapping, and can be deployed essentially within hours of unboxing and creating value for your operation. In an environment where you've got associates that are pushing two pieces of equipment throughout their pick process, it was a quick win opportunity for this particular customer to free up their hands and allow them to work a little bit more ergonomically. But as you see, there's 13 opportunities here, and we even look at the ones that we don't think make sense, right? Autonomous pallet moving in this operation, yeah, there's a great opportunity for it, but it didn't make sense for what they were doing today. Outbound dimensioning, weighing, and sizing and freight auditing. Again, great opportunity, oftentimes makes sense for this client. It didn't meet their strategic objectives, right? And then, autonomous lift trucks for put away. Yes, they could have done it. They had the right aisle widths. They didn't have the right volume. It wasn't something that was going to provide a long-term ROI. It could be done, but the idea was let's deprioritize that one. And the reason I call that one out specifically is the customer was looking to make an investment in that space, and after having conversation was like, that's literally the last thing you should look at, because it's going to provide the least amount of long-term value for your operation. And so ultimately the idea here is, between Supplysoft and EMP, we want to help you as a client, find that version of this pattern that allows you to look into automation and deploy these solutions in a way that creates value for your business. I've added our contact information here if you care to screenshot that. If you don't have Bert, Victoria, or my own contact information, this is available to you. We certainly appreciate you joining us here today, and would love to take any questions that may have come up over the course of the last 50 minutes.
And this PowerPoint presentation will come to everybody who's attended today along with the recording. So in case you didn't grab a screenshot there, you're all good. I will send that out to you shortly. And I did want to just call out, actually, John, something you said kind of struck home. So before I moved out of Dallas about a month and a half ago, I got to visit a client that was close by, and they had implemented a pick-to-light system about 10 years ago. And I was talking to the warehouse manager, and he said, yeah, all of our pickers have been here for around 10 to 12 years. And he said that was just having that ease in their workday. It was something that it's not a small system by any means to add into the warehouse, but it's not a huge thing to maintain. It's not a huge component to maintain, and it just changed everyone's workflow so much. All of their pickers are happy to be there. Their jobs are much easier than they were before. That was an awesome system to see, and that definitely resonates with that case study.
And I think, Victoria, on that point, and John, I mean, it's one that we sometimes don't give it enough emphasis, because yes, optimization improvements, but improving the well-being of the associates that are in the facilities is equally as important as well. And this technology does do that. Think about that person that's got to walk those aisles. Yeah, someone can jokingly tell me they're getting their steps, but when you're doing that as often as they do, so there's these opportunities really are beneficial to those associates as well.
Yeah, I'll give one more case example, but they were more enterprise. They're one of the Warehouse Advantage clients that we did some business with. But the reason they were making the investment in mobile robots was largely because they were at the lower end of the pay scale in the region and had incredible turnover, losing associates left and right, and that was very painful. So they made an investment in automation. We were able to right size their labor force, and then they increased their rates to being at the top of the pay scale and essentially just slashed their turnover rates. And interestingly enough, I had the opportunity to be on a presentation with the COO of that business 2 years ago. They even reduced their insurance rates because they didn't have certain injury claims. Like, that was a thing that they put up on the screen, and he hadn't shared that with me before. I'd always hypothesized that would be an impact, but it was never like quantified. And that was the first time I had ever seen that particular value component quantified for an operation that deployed automation. Yeah, we've got fewer folks, we have fewer, workman's comp claims. We were able to actually reduce our insurance rates and negotiate better rates overall because the solution improved the operating environment so much, which I found incredibly insightful.
That's an interesting one, kind of an unintended consequence that was very positive.
Yeah, exactly.
So a question that came through is, it seems maybe it's dependent on what technology is brought into the warehouse, but are there particular roles in the warehouse that benefit the most from implementing automation?
It's where you implement it, right? I think it's valuable at all spectrums, right? Supervisors, for example, get greater visibility into the operation through a digital touch point and digital representation of performance metrics, right? Some environments don't even track UPH on a per associate level, and you may be able to gain those sorts of insights. That right? The solutions are often designed to create a better operating environment, as we talked about, for the picking associates, right? There are times when maybe you're looking at something as simple as voice solution, and you're allowing operators in a frozen environment to not have to pull their hands out of the nice, cozy, warm gloves and be more comfortable in those environments. So there's no single one point of scale in the operation that gets that isolates the value. It really does it benefits the operation itself, benefits the leadership, the managers, the associates. It really does trickle down in most instances.
Next question is, I've had a lot of pressure, labor pressure and rising order volumes. I'm hearing that we should automate. There's again a lot of pressure behind that, but we don't even know where in our operation it would make the most sense. So where should I start?
Where should I start? Well, that's the problem we're trying to help resolve, right? Labor pressure, picking pressure, pressure from the C-suite. They come in many different areas, right? The objective is to really take a step back, observe the overall operation, and be able to at times push back and say, I know you want us to look here, but we did some research, and that might not be the highest value opportunity for automation in our building. Here's where we might want to start. Oftentimes that comes through some third-party validation, as an example. There isn't. That's the key point here that we were trying to drive home through this webinar. Is it's not about identifying how, it's identifying where. And there's no, without really observing the operation, without really digging into the pain points and understanding how a building moves, it's difficult to identify and say you should automate picking. Well, that oftentimes is a very high priority place to implement. But there are times when packing is your biggest pain point. Maybe investing in a pack size type of automated cartonization product creates value for the business. It really comes from understanding the material flow in the business and the workflows to identify where to start. Doesn't mean that's the only place you look, but oftentimes you identify a quick win. I think that's really important thing to think about, especially as the SMB. What is the quick win? How are we going to create economic value as quickly as possible to prove that the automation solution is right for our business? And then you can incrementally increase scope from there.
Awesome. That's a great way to frame that. And this next question is, so we're interested in automation, but there's a lot of fear because the wrong investment could really hurt us. So how do I build a business case that our leadership will really believe and make sure that we're right sizing instead of just overbuying technology?
Yeah, again, I'll defer back to a little bit of what Humberto said, right? Building the business case comes from having the solid foundation and being able to quantify the value of process improvement, right? You can't really improve what you don't measure, right? I know it's cliche. It's been a long-serving thing. Anybody that did business school has heard that statement, but you got to be able to quantify, the operation as it stands today, be able to quantify the impact of an investment and what it would look like for tomorrow. So it starts with a foundation of understanding of the operation, both physically and digitally.
And how do you prioritize opportunities to implement automation when just everything feels important?
Yeah, well, that oftentimes can be, I think, intrinsic, right? We're all able to create a stack ranking, and sometimes that comes from collaboration as well, right? I've seen very successful scenarios where, an automation strike team was put together, even in a small business, say, well, all these things are important. We don't know where to start. Well, let's all get together, put sticky notes on a wall and start to identify collaboratively where we should start. And sometimes those things start to surface the most painful opportunities. But at the end of the day, it's about how do you improve the outcomes for your customers and how do you economically justify the investment. Those are things you want to look at. I often want to look at first.
And Bert, maybe you can provide some insight for this next question. Is how do we know that our Edge WMS is ready to support automation, or if we'd be setting ourselves up to fail by starting an automation project?
Actually, I'm going to have John maybe take that one, because from what I was saying earlier, given that we have the data and everything else, I think the audit and analysis that John has done over the years, being able to come in and have access to that data, where someone that doesn't have access to that data will make it a little bit more difficult. But with that data, I think, yeah, John and the audit that he's been doing really helps to service that, to say, yes, everything is there and ready to go. That's one of them. And then certainly we've done also, we refer to it as our 360 review, that, we can come on site and do an analysis of some of these fundamental base activities that I had mentioned, and see, maybe you haven't been doing as good a job, for example, in getting all your units of measures and pack size. Maybe you haven't done a good as job as you would like to have with getting your cartons and UPC codes, for example. So those certainly could be opportunities as well. But John, any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think that you did a good job with narrowing that down, Humberto. I mean, at the end of the day, it's understanding, having that foundational understanding of the data itself. The WMS is the brains of the operation, right? You use the WMS to understand where your inventory is, to direct processes, to release work to the warehouse and feed things. So that is the brains of the operation, and making sure that you've got a good understanding of how that brain works before embarking on, okay, how do we make it better? I think is a critical component of any automation assessment.
That's good.
Well, thank you both so much for answering those questions, and any questions we did not get to today, we'll go ahead and have answered and send out along with the recording and this presentation. But we are right at time, so again, thank you so much to our amazing hosts, and thank you to everyone for joining us today for this conversation. So I'll leave it to if you guys would like to say any closing remarks.
Yes, I certainly just want to thank everyone again for joining us. This is an important topic, and it will continue to become even more important. And the fact that now it's becoming more available to our client base is really exciting. And so I would look forward to and encourage folks to consider an assessment, because I think there's an opportunity there that you can really benefit from.
And I'll just say thanks, everybody. I think, as Humberto said, it's a really impactful topic. It's been, automation solutions have been evolving over the last several years. If you went back, as little as, call it 5-6 years ago, right? Mobile robots are still at the very early stages. Now it's almost like, oh yeah, been there, done that in most instances, right? There's a lot of folks that have started to already look at this stuff, and now the market's even more complex because of that fact, because there is such a market opportunity for it. So I encourage, all in the audience to, take a deep look at the operation, and as you think through, how do we do things better and more effectively, consider looking into automation solutions and what they can do for your business.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, John. We really appreciate it. It was great to have you today.
Yes, thank you so much. Okay, have a good day, everyone.
Take care, everyone.